The last thing Rishi Sunak wanted to be confronted with on his return from last week's G7 summit was yet another Boris Johnson row. That is what he got, after it emerged that the Prime Minister's predecessor had once again been reported to police over allegations he broke lockdown rules by hosting family and friends at 10 Downing Street in Chequers while COVID restrictions were still in force. Coupled with ongoing discontent over record-high immigration, and a moment when it looked like he might have to sack Suella Braverman as Home Secretary, it remains clear that Mr. Sunak has persistent problems with his right wing. The Prime Minister remains convinced he is going to win the next general election, even if, with the Conservatives around 15 points behind Labour in the opinion polls, few agree with him. He has told friends that the public will reject Sir Keir Starmer because he doesn't stand for anything, and is doubling down on his argument that the Labour leader is a pure opportunist who will say anything for short-term gain. By contrast, Mr. Sunak says privately that his approach is similar to that of famed investor Warren Buffett, who disregards the daily ups and downs of his investments to focus on the longer picture. But his agenda was knocked off course this week by Mr. Johnson's reappearance on the front pages, not only because of his latest police referral, but also over a dispute with the official COVID inquiry whose chair believes she should have access to all the former Prime Minister's communications in the run-up to the pandemic, rather than just those which the Cabinet Office chooses to hand over. Backers of Mr. Johnson believe he is the victim of a political stitch-up. Speaking on her Talk TV show last night, ex-Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries said, "Some in Westminster, what they fear more than anything is the return of Boris Johnson, and they will go to any lengths to ensure that they prevent that from happening as they let their imaginations run riot and lead them down the paths of devious intent." She does not speak for the majority of Conservative MPs. Backers of Mr. Sunak admit that there is widespread discontent, which shows itself in rebellions over Brexit, migration and economic policy. But they are adamant Mr. Johnson is no longer the focus for any of this. "We are in a post-Boris era and therefore people are looking for rebellions. They have not got a lever," one former cabinet minister told adding, "It's been a noisy fortnight. There is a lot more noise than substance." Meanwhile, the government's fate is about what will happen in the real world. A Tory source said, "The thing about Boris is he wasn't a very good prime minister. The more I've been thinking about that time, the more I've realized it was just crap. Much as I love him as an electoral asset." Another government insider pointed to the failed revolt over Mr. Sunak's revised Brexit deal as proof Mr. Johnson had lost his following as the party sought to unite around the new leader, saying, "The bulk of the parliamentary party, other than a handful of usual suspects, is mostly interested in winning. Look at the Windsor Framework vote. Boris and Liz tried to make themselves the leaders of a certain way of thinking, and it didn't work." For many senior Conservatives, this week has been an unwelcome reminder of the chaos that reigned during Mr. Johnson's last few months in office, which ended when more than 50 ministers resigned over the course of 2 days last July. "I resigned last year because I could no longer trust what Number 10 were saying," one of them said. "And what's happened this week just makes me think that I was right about that." Ministers insist the size of the pro-Johnson camp is too small to cause any real problems to Mr. Sunak. "Boris is Boris," one said. "But the fact that only about 5 people are willing to support him, even off the record, tells you everything you need to know. People have just moved on now." Members of Mr. Johnson's inner circle dispute this. In a show of strength, they forced the government to pull a scheduled vote this week on the suspension of SNP MP Margaret Ferrier, who came to Parliament when she was infected with COVID-19, so that it could not set a precedent for Mr. Johnson if he is found to have broken Commons rules over Partygate. A source close to the former Prime Minister said that this gambit was only possible because a significant number of Conservative MPs were willing to take part. Mr. Sunak is trying to shore up his right wing. A recent cabinet meeting included the chairs of the Tory backbench policy committees, including his fierce critic Sir John Redwood, in an attempt to show that the Prime Minister is listening to those who fear his political direction is all wrong. Confirmation that net migration had hit a record level, at more than 600,000, did not help. But some conservative centrists were relieved the numbers were not higher still. One said, "Everybody was getting excited about immigration, but when the figures came out most people just shrugged." A minister told If some of the more extreme predictions had come true, like net migration of 1 million, it would have been a problem. But actually I don't think it is. They said that students should be removed from the figures, like most other countries. Mr. Sunak's closest allies also complain that the statistics include expat Britons returning to the country and Ukrainian refugees, pointing out that migration numbers would be on their way down if that were not the case. Ms. Braverman this week escaped the sack over allegations she tried to hide a speeding fine, but some MPs have already lost confidence in her. A senior MP said her attempt to reduce inflows by cracking down on the ability of graduate students to bring their family members showed a lack of imagination, and suggested that she had been forced to go public about her unhappiness with the status quo because she is incapable of making the case within government. One of the Home Secretary's most powerful enemies on the question of migration is now the Archbishop of Canterbury, who has spoken out against her policies and is trying to amend the government's legislation to force Ms. Braverman to play a more active role in helping refugees around the world. A Labour source said, "He's a lot more political than most people might think. He's focused on what will actually make a difference. The real-world impact of the government's attempts to limit the numbers by cracking down on the number of international students' dependents is already being felt." Lance, a Nigerian living in Brighton, works as a recovery worker but is also studying in the UK. Speaking in a focus group organized by the political strategy firm Public First this week, he said the UK should realize such policies will have very real repercussions for the country. If you look at what is happening in the UK right now, this whole lot of shortage in all industries across the UK, professionals coming in, from everywhere in the world coming in to fill up positions that were affected by Brexit, he said. "I'm not going to leave my country to come here to serve as a professional and leave my family behind. It is not possible. It's like slavery, it's like modern slavery. At the end of the day, I'm going to end up leaving and moving to another country somewhere like Canada, where I'm appreciated, and in 2 years or whatever, I can easily get a passport and become a citizen." Kevin, also from Nigeria and living in Romford, is studying while also working part-time in IT support. He questioned whether some in the government were being honest with people about the ramifications of their policies. "I'm not sure if the repercussions have been well articulated," he told the focus group. "We've got university towns, a lot of the income that comes into some of those towns is generated by the universities. Foreigners will stop coming to some of those towns. What happens to the local businesses? So what happens going forward when you lose all of those numbers? What's the cushioning effect in place to handle some of that? And you've got politicians not answering that question. So there's questions to be asked and to be answered, but there are no answers right now." Adblock test. Why?